You're listening to The Green Flag with your hosts, Lukas Wacker and Kyle Cushman.
Welcome back to The Green Flag, everybody. Busy week of action on track at Darlington that displayed some incredible finishes, some crazy storylines, and couldn't be more happy to be back here talking it and breaking it down once again here this week. If you missed last week's episode, we are officially back here with The Green Flag, so very happy to be back on YouTube, Spotify, and we're on TikTok and Instagram now, so just make sure to go follow us, and the links are in the description below. But Kyle, what a weekend of action we just had at Darlington. And then also some news that broke just this afternoon before we're recording this with North Wilkesboro returning. So lots to get into in today's show.
Yeah, big week, a fantastic week of racing. Of course, Darlington being Darlington and everything that is great going with that racetrack and great finishes and battles and everything like that. Then a nice little cherry on top, I guess you could say, with a North Wilkesboro return next year of all time. So very exciting week if you're looking at the history of racing, looking at the tracks we're going to in the future and just went to, and an exciting weekend of racing just in general, really.
Absolutely. And I'm super excited by the news that happened today.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure basically anybody that's a NASCAR fan, if you're a historian kind of fan, if you love the classic kind of races, or if you're a new fan, I think you kind of welcome a return to the past as we try and mix the past with the present here moving forward. So we've got North Wilkesboro we're going to talk about just in a second. We've got Erik Jones's Darlington win coming up later on in the show, and then Kyle Busch's contract rumors, as it seems like that is approaching a near end, as his 2023 plans are still unknown at the time of we're recording this. And then, of course, to wrap it all up, we are going to have our draft once again like we did last week, 5 picks each. That's going to be fun. We'll talk about our results from last week, so stay tuned for that later on in the show. But let's open up with North Wilkesboro, Kyle. This is the big news. This is where the All-Star race is going to be held on May 21st next year in 2023. It seems like this deal was kind of put together a little bit late, and that's why the 2023 schedule has kind of not been released yet. That's looking to be sometime released likely next week. There's no definitive timeline on when that will be coming out, but this is massive news to return to an historical venue. They haven't raced there since 1996. I mean, this is unbelievable that they're going back to a track that still has the asphalt that was back when they were last there. And they were thinking about turning it up into a dirt track, but those plans have been since removed. That came out last night, those announcements that they're going to keep the original asphalt for now. But Kyle, your initial thoughts here. This is some big news that the All-Star race is going to have some sort of meaning to it once again after a couple of years here at Texas Motor Speedway that were lackluster, to say the least.
Man, I can't believe this is real. Like, honestly, I never thought that we'd see racing at North Wilkesboro again, period. Like late models, anything. The past couple of weeks having the huge late model races and stuff that they've had there was awesome to begin with. And I thought that was kind of going to be what North Wilkesboro would be into the future. Maybe they put dirt on it, do some stuff with that. Never in a million years did I think we would see NASCAR there again, the Cup Series there again, let alone as soon as next year. So props to NASCAR. They get a lot of hate for a lot of different things, but clearly they saw an opportunity here, whether it was TV pushing for it, whether it was NASCAR pushing for it, or just a little bit of everything that made this happen. This is what a lot of people were hoping to see, a return to North Wilkesboro in some capacity. And it's happening a lot sooner than people were expecting. And it's getting a significant date as well as the All-Star race, which is going to make the All-Star race feel like a legitimate marquee event once again, which it hasn't been for multiple years, dating even before they moved to Texas, dating even before they tried the Bristol stuff. For a lot of those final years at Charlotte, it was pretty lackluster. They were trying a bunch of different stuff. It didn't work. And now we're going to North Wilkesboro, which is going to be a place that everyone in that field is going to want to win at. So, like you mentioned, 1996 is the last time the Cup Series was there. And man, I cannot wait to see it because the late model stuff was great the last couple of weeks, and it's just going to be times 1,000 once the Cup Series gets there.
Yeah, props to Marcus Smith and Dale Earnhardt Jr., who have kind of like really led this charge, it seems, over the past couple of years. Of course, who would have thought the pandemic would have almost been the blessing in disguise for North Wilkesboro to return with the
Yeah.
the scanning of iRacing of the classic track, not its current state, but when it was back in its heyday, back in the 70s and 80s, that was kind of the scan they went for that track, where it was a little bit more in shape, let's say. But nonetheless, that has just brought some new attention or rebirth of this track. And clearly the fans are absolutely all for it. They showed up for Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s race. I believe it was on Wednesday night or Tuesday night this week.
Yeah.
I mean, they showed up in full force. Of course, there are some, little quirks to the place. It's definitely run down. It's an old track. You can tell that it's been abandoned for quite some time. Parking is not the greatest, but I think at the end of the day, fans will put up with whatever it needs to be in terms of the fan experience for the on-track product of being back there for an historic venue like that. That's going to be the hottest ticket next season, I would say, above almost the Daytona 500 championship race. Whatever is going to be happening with the schedule next season, we don't know that, of course, yet, but that is going to be the hottest ticket in all of NASCAR next season. And I cannot wait to see what kind of show they put on at North Wilkesboro. It's an unbelievable track. We saw it with the iRacing stuff when they were doing the Pro Invitational 2 years ago. Put on a decent race. Of course, that's just simulation. I can't wait to see actual cup cars on that track with this next gen car. Hopefully they can figure out the short track program a little bit more by then, and we have a little bit of a better race. We'll see what Bristol and Martinsville have in the playoffs here in a couple weeks. But I can't believe that we are going back there. I can't wait to see something that I haven't seen before with a sport like this. There's rare things that we've not seen as NASCAR fans here, Kyle. Like, this is a track that was last year before we were both born. So this is going to be all new for this entire generation of fans. And I can't wait to see what Marcus Smith and all of Dale Earnhardt Jr. and everybody involved with the track can put on for that race. So what are you looking forward to most, I guess, with North Wilkesboro, Kyle? It's going to be a pretty special night. Yeah,
well, for starters, I would imagine that's going to either be a bunch of throwback schemes or just become a throwback race or stuff like that. Or at least I hope they do, because that would be great to see, rather than trying to shoehorn it into the first Darlington race, stuff like that, which doesn't work quite as well as it did with the Southern 500 and under the lights and stuff like that.
Agreed.
So I hope they do stuff with that. But honestly, it's just seeing a brand new short track, which is something that returning, you know what I mean? Short track, because we've seen mile and a halves come and go. We've seen various road courses come and go over time watching NASCAR. But in terms of short tracks, it's been Richmond, Bristol, Martinsville the entire time. There hasn't been any other short tracks and stuff like that. You can look to lower series and stuff. You can include Iowa if you want to, stuff like that. But for the Cup Series, in terms of short tracks, it has been those three tracks and nothing else the entire time that we've been watching NASCAR. So it is going to be awesome to see that return.
Welcome.
I don't know what special stuff they have planned for it and everything like that. Of course, the announcement coming down officially earlier today as we're recording this, but man, I cannot wait to see it. And it is incredible that now 2 dates on the NASCAR calendar next year, the All-Star race and another marquee event in Chicago, are basically because of iRacing. And in terms of Chicago being something that they kind of did as their own kind of project to kind of see how it would look in a simulation before maybe trying to push for it in real life. And then for North Wilkesboro, the main reason that the track is even in a state that you could possibly race on in the first place is that iRacing went out there, cleaned up the track and scanned the facilities so that we could have it saved if it ended up getting demolished and things like that. And now a couple of years later, it's going to be raced on by the biggest series in the United States. So it is just incredible news, and something that a lot of people were something that a lot of people were hoping to see, but no one ever thought that we'd actually see.
Yeah, exactly. The last time of record that a Cup car was on North Wilkesboro was the picture that has become pretty well known, I'd say, by Twitter and the NASCAR community, of Kevin Harvick there, I believe in 2010, testing like the old COT car before it transitioned into the 2011 version. That's when it had the splitter with everything like that from the previous COT with the rear wing. It was just kind of like a bridge gap, that 2010 car. So it is crazy to think that over 12 years later, probably around 13 by the time we are there, that we're going to have a cup cars on that track. And it's just going to bring some meaning back to the All-Star race that has been so full of gimmicks and stages and lengths and formats and everything under the sun they've thrown at this thing to try to make it something that hasn't really been. And it's just been kind of I mean, Texas Motor Speedway was just trying to give them that second date because they knew how bad those races were when they were on the full-time calendar. They would just give it to the All-Star race. They had to meet that 2 races at Texas. But I think it becomes full circle here. North Wilkesboro was kicked off the calendar back in 96, going into 97 for Texas Motor Speedway, and then a second Loudon date. Now, Texas Motor Speedway is likely down to 1 Cup Series date entirely, and North Wilkesboro is going to be back and becomes the oldest technically NASCAR Cup Series track on the calendar, taking the place of Martinsville, because Martinsville's obviously had that since North Wilkesboro went off the calendar. So very exciting stuff, and can't wait to see what North Wilkesboro has in store. So any final thoughts there about North Wilkesboro, Kyle? And we'll break down the 2023 schedule whenever that comes available. But North Wilkesboro itself, any final thoughts?
Yeah, no, just super, super excited to see it actually happen. Something that a lot of people never thought that we'd actually see, but hoped we would see. And this is quite the timeline that we're in to actually see Cup cars at North Wilkesboro in less than a year.
Yep. And it should be very, very fun to watch all of that. But moving on here to the next part, Kyle Busch and his contract rumors. Where is he going to land in 2023? It's going to be an interesting battle between, it seems, a 2-horse race between RCR and 2311 Racing. Of course, we think Colleague Racing could be still in that mix, but all reports indicate from Adam Stern and other sources that it's coming down to RCR and 2311 Racing. Of course, a Chevrolet team and a Toyota team. It's a completely switch. It's a totally different dynamic between the two teams. They're no way comparable. 2311, a startup, RCR, one of the legendary teams in the sport. There's a lot of different ways that this could go. It seems like RCR could be the slight favorite, if anything, right now, but I'm pretty darn sure that there's nothing been put pen to paper for Kyle Busch for next season as of yet. So there's a lot of debate here. And I think before the news becomes official, Kyle, I really wanted to break this down with you before the news comes out, because I think that there's a lot of different ways that you can go about this. I'd be interested to know what Kyle Busch's mind is obviously feeling right now. But if you were Kyle Busch right now, Kyle, where would you be leaning towards and why?
So that's a fantastic question, because there's pros and cons to all the different places that he could go, whether it's RCR 2311, which according to Adam Stern and his latest reporter are the 2 front runners right now, but also for some of the teams that we've also heard mentioned in Stewart Haas and Colleague Racing as well. Yeah. I think it really depends on what he wants, whether it's short-term championship potential or long-term championship potential, because I think those could be 2 different scenarios to look for in terms of where you want to go, but also what you want to do into the future, whether you want to be an owner into the future, what you want to do with your truck series team into the future, all these different things. There's a lot of different options and a lot of different pros and cons weighing on Kyle Busch going into what he's going to decide. So for RCR and just because that I think right now seems to be the front runner, all things considered. I don't love that as a landing spot, to be honest, just because we kind of see Tyler Reddick and what he's done right now in terms of being able to run up front at certain ovals, be a strong guy on road courses, be able to be in contention for wins and things like that. But overall, I don't think that they are quite the championship contender, at least at this point, that we could see from some of the other teams that are interested in Kyle Busch at the very least. So of the 2 front runners, I do think 2311 Racing is the better fit. But I do think that the 2311 option is depending on what happens with Kyle or with Kurt Busch, excuse me, if he does race next year, if they open up a 3rd seat. There's a lot of different things up in the air regarding what would happen with 2311, whereas with RCR, it's pretty clearly that he would slide into that Reddick seat, and Reddick would either move to 2311 early or would just sit on the sidelines for a year or something like that. So in terms of 2311 and why I think that they're a better option than RCR, I think we've seen them have a better upward trajectory from where they've been since they've started to where they are now. We saw this year with them adding Kurt Busch and things like that, them being contention for wins, actually win a race with Kurt Busch, of course, the track that we're going to this weekend at Kansas. And we saw them really take that step from team trying to figure it out last year to team that is in contention at certain tracks. The next step, of course, would be to find that consistency, be a team that can be top 10 in regular season points and contend for a championship. And I think they're on that trajectory right now. And so for Kyle Busch, I think of those two front runners, 2311 is the spot that I'd prefer over RCR, but SHR is still there. We see what they're able to do with Kevin Harvick recently in their resurgence. Of course, Kevin Harvick probably not going to be there after next year or 2 years. They'll be looking for a team leader. That's a strong place to go that has championship pedigree in Colleague racing. There are a few owners in the sport that have as much money as Matt Colleague, and he's serious about racing. So if you want somebody or to go somewhere that has long-term aspirations of being a championship contender that could support your Truck Series team and stuff like that, I do think Colleague is a decent option as well. So there's a lot of different things at play here for Kyle Busch, but of the front runners, of the teams mentioned, I do think 2311 is the best spot, but I do still think that RCR is probably the more likely scenario right now.
It's fascinating, really. I mean,
really
I never would have thought, looking back at when the M&M's announcement happened, that we would be in this position. It's a really, really interesting place that Kyle Busch is in. I'm not a fan of it. It's definitely increased my my blood my blood pressure and everything under the sun. Like, it's just been an emotional year in general. As a Kyle Busch fan, I think everybody can attest to that. But I'm mixed on it. I don't know, because it would be so weird in a way if he were to go to 2311 Racing, the sister team to Joe Gibbs Racing, in a way. A lot of the same resources, a lot of it shared technology. Does he want to stay in the Toyota kind of pipeline, or, you know, in that manufacturer, while he just kind of got the boot from JGR? Will he feel comfortable enough going over to a sister team, if you will, like, and get that sponsorship from 2311 when Joe Gibbs Racing couldn't really offer him that? I feel like that's going to be a really interesting decision if he does end up taking that. Of course, I think both teams are going to add a third car in case this happens, whether that's Tyler Reddick maybe coming over to 2311 Racing and Kyle taking a third car, or if Kurt Busch could come back. I think that Kyle will slot in right alongside his brother. And then Tyler Reddick is still under contract for 2023 with RCR, so I don't really see him jumping the gun a year early at the moment. I think if he goes to RCR, they're going to add a third car, and then they look at maybe something like Sheldon Creed or Austin Hill eventually there to maybe slide into that third seat, or maybe look elsewhere in a year or two's time.
My only thing with that is, where are they getting that charter? And where
I
are
think
they
people
getting
are in
the
the
money
market
to?
for charters, though. That, like,
people are in the market, but where are they getting the money to buy that charter as well?
It's a good question. I don't know the ins and outs necessarily of like all the business, but I would assume that there could be a deal in place to buy a $20 million charter from, you know, Starcom, or, you know, a Rick Racing, or
charter's gone.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
My point being, for those teams, I think 2311 is the more likely to buy a charter, but I just don't really see a scenario where it makes sense for RCR to bring in a big name free agent and Kyle Busch, somehow find the sponsorship and make up the funds to buy a 20 million charter all at the same time, when your other big name driver is about to leave as well. That's the only part for me. But
fair enough. I just saw a report that it looks like they could get a third.
I'm
charter.
sure they're talking about it. I just don't know how likely it is.
Fair enough. Like, for me, I don't like any of the options really for Kyle Busch, to be honest. I think that they are middle of the road teams that I don't know if they're really in that top echelon. I would look at Penske, JGR, and Hendrick, right? Those, I think we can establish, are really the three. And then you have some big name guys at some other teams, but they're not well-rounded enough like those three top teams, where they're consistent, they have the resources, and they're just out and out championship contenders, it seems, every single season. Like, ideally, when you look at Martin Truex Jr.'s contract situation right now, he's signed a 1-year deal, right? He's coming back for 2023. He's likely gone at the end of next season, depending on how things go. We'll see if he re-ups for another 1 year. You know, he could just keep on doing 1-year contracts until he feels like he's done. But if that's two JGR guys out, Ty Gibbs is going to take that 18 car for next season. And then you're losing Martin Truex Jr. Where are you going to go for that extra car? It's going to be fascinating to see. Could very well be. But I don't know if it makes sense for Kyle Busch to necessarily stay in the Toyota frame if you will. It's probably the easier option when you look at KBM. You're staying with the trucks. You don't have to worry about switching over. It's just essentially the body type for that. It doesn't really have too much of an effect if you switch from, the interior stuff and everything. It's more about the drivers that really comes down to KBM. It's not necessarily the actual manufacturer. It comes down to who's contracted under Toyota, who's contracted with Chevrolet. I think Ford is a very outside shot right now with Stewart-Haas Racing. It doesn't seem like that's going to be going anywhere. So my vision that I had when I texted you that, I don't think that's going to be coming to fruition, but, I don't know. It's because from everything that I've heard from him, from Kyle, that is that there's a lot of different things that go into this decision that most guys don't ever have to deal with. And I think that's what's, prolonged this entire experience for him. So overall, it's just been a complete mess from, how I think everything's handled. Like, TRD wants to keep Kyle Busch, like they said at Daytona, this is their 60 home run hitter. Like, this is the guy that is really, he's the guy that's gotten them the 2 championships. You look at Martin Truex Jr., of course, winning that championship in 2017, but he's the only JGR guy that's won a championship since Toyota's come into the sport. So they're losing a big guy here. And if they lose him entirely, it would be a massive blunder, in my opinion, by both Toyota and JGR to not be able to sell Kyle Busch, one of the more, I'd say, top 3 notable name in the sport that's marketable, maybe for the wrong reasons at times. But for his pay salary, which he's earned, right?
Well, no. That his salary has nothing to do with whether he's marketable or not. He's said as much that his reputation has made it difficult to get new sponsors on board. Yes, but you're trying to find a sponsor that covers that salary, right? Or tries to cover it for the majority. That doesn't change what he wants salary wise doesn't impact whether he's marketable or not. As a sport, it's good to have a Kyle Busch because it makes the week to week certain comments, stuff like that, more interesting, more entertaining. But Kyle Busch as an individual driver, I don't think is as marketable as you're making it out to be. And I think
probably
we're seeing,
not, and I'm biased, right?
Yeah, and I think the reason why he's finding so much trouble finding a sponsor that is big enough, that is willing to take on enough, is kind of a result of kind of the reputation that he has. Mars and M&M's gave him a lot of leash to kind of do whatever you want, say whatever you want. And it's kind of coming back to bite him, the reputation that he has.
Yeah. And this is a pivotal point in his career. I think wherever he lands, that's likely one of, if not the last spot he goes in his Cup Series career. He's trying to find his.
It depends how long he signs for. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Like if he signs a 1 or 2 year deal, I could see him going somewhere else if another big seat opens up at that time.
If I'm Kyle Busch, I mean, I've talked to you about this.
It's not going to happen. Like you can keep trying to put it out there. It's never going to happen.
I think the ideal spot for him would be that 48 car.
It's never going to happen.
I probably won't. But if they were to sign like a 1 year deal, Bowman's out of contract at the end of next season.
Hendrick won't pay that much to get another big name driver in. They did have 4 big name ticket driver things in the past. They had 2 championship quality guys and 2 guys that were marketable, but didn't have the results to go with it. And Dale Jr., Casey Kane, we saw them go away from that model to go for young drivers over the past handful of years. It's worked better for them. They're going to have 2 big name drivers on big contracts in the near future. And Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson, William Byron might be in that kind of progressing up the grid to warrant a bigger contract, stuff like that. So I just can't see Hendrick going for another big name driver for a big money signing when they've kind of been there, done that before.
But nobody's Kyle Busch in that situation. I will argue that. Like none of those names that
what is Kyle Busch bringing that they don't already have at that team?
Well, I mean, he's better than Bowman, but like at the end of the day,
but that's not the point.
If they want a well-rounded 4, they would go to Kyle Busch. But the point
is that they don't need that anymore. They tried that and it didn't work.
It's just what I think would be the best fit for him to go back to Hendrick Motorsports.
Yeah, it's going to be the best team, the best car, stuff like that. I just don't think it's a realistic scenario.
Probably not. But I think that it would just make more sense to me than going to RCR with an owner that he's had problems with in the past, which they've reconciled.
It would make more sense, but it's with the options that you have, right?
Yeah, and that's why I think that they're all kind of like not his ideal choice, and that's why it's taken so long. If he had somebody that, if they had a name that popped off the table that really grabbed his attention, we would have probably found this out in July. This contract stuff would have been done, but there's been so much. It's so even between. You can't really decipher between who could look good. I mean, RCR hasn't been this competitive in years with race winning abilities consistently. When you have a guy like Tyler Reddick in there, I mean, it's back to the Kevin Harvick days when he was there, when RCR was, a championship threat.
Yep.
I mean, I have Tyler Reddick winning the championship this season. So, you never know if he wants to go to a championship winning based off my predictions. But 23-11, they're still finding their groove. They haven't quite gone off to the hottest start compared to Trackhouse, who came in at the same time as them. But you never know. And the thing that RCR definitely does is they have the engine alliance with Hendrick and Trackhouse. So there is a bit of a kind of alliance, if you will, between the three teams. It's not Hendrick Motorsports equipment, but there is still a little bit of an affiliation between that. I wonder what the selling point is for RCR for coming there. I think it would throw NASCAR Nation insane if Kyle Busch went there driving a number 8, a number 3, a number 88, anything like that along those lines for Kyle Busch, I think would throw NASCAR fandom in pandemonium. But I'm interested to see where he goes. Obviously, I'm biased with that. I need to know where he goes, but it's just fascinating that it's taken this long and that those are his options. And that's just basically the way the market is right now. And I can't believe that the NASCAR market is in this state where you cannot find a guy or a sponsor to sign a guy like Kyle Busch, or find that it would be profitable to partner with a guy like Kyle Busch after how many wins. He's the only 2-time champion on the grid at the moment. This is one of the premier names the NASCAR has turned out in the past 15 years. So
part of it is the context though, right? Like if JGR didn't have Ty Gibbs coming up, who was the premier prospect, name, everything like that, who had decent results so far in 23-11, but is the guy coming up for Joe Gibbs Racing, then something probably gets figured out. And if Kyle Busch doesn't have as many bridges burned that he has at certain teams and stuff like that, it probably gets figured out quicker as well. So it's not just quite that there's a big name driver who's excellent, has results and stuff like that, that's on the open market and can't find a team. There's some other context there as well that is why he's in this situation. But yeah, it's racing. It's not the same as stick and ball sports where the sponsors aren't the main source of income, where you try to get the best team possible. It's not quite like that. And for Kyle Busch, the results have slipped over the last couple of years. He is the big ticket driver commanding a big salary. If you can't quite get those sponsors to cover it as well, there's a lot of risk involved potentially if it's a long-term contract and stuff like that as well. So I really hope we get a resolution to this soon, because it is the big kind of story going into next season. And once it gets solved, then it becomes what happens with charters, what happens with his performance next year. There's a ton of
he's the first
really interesting things to kind of follow suit as well.
He knows it, right? He's publicly admitted that I have to be the first one to go, to state where I'm going, and then everything else will kind of fall in place from there.
To be fair, there isn't a ton that kind of follows suit depending on where he goes. Like if it's a team that's adding a charter, then it's just Ty Gibbs goes into the 18 and that's kind of done with. I think if he goes to an RCR, if he does slide into the 8 car, then there could be some kind of ramifications if Reddick gets let go early and stuff like that.
Yeah, there could be a trickle down effect that is bigger than what we're thinking right now. It could be smaller than what we're thinking right now. It could be, just like you said, as simple as Ty Gibbs taking that 18 and Kyle goes to a 3rd car, and then everything else will kind of sort itself out from there. But it's short-sighted from JGR, in my opinion, to be losing Kyle Busch like this when you've got, arguably a guy in Ty Gibbs that's going to be, the face of that team for the next 20 years. There's no beating around the bush of that, but you're losing the guy that has brought you the most success out of probably anybody that's ever been in your team. So it is quite strange to me thinking that's
probably happened,
but
you could make an argument for a couple other guys, but
probably. But I would say in this modern era here where it's pretty difficult to win with the playoff system and stuff, that Kyle Busch has got it twice.
Well, no, I know. I'm saying like you can make an argument
he's
for
filtered their entire
guys,
prospect pipeline. Like it goes down much further than just his cup level results, right?
I mean, you could say that, but how many of those prospects have actually gotten to JGR? That's part of
Christopher Bell's in there right now.
I know. My point being is like there's a couple guys and one of them ended up getting punted as well. So part of this process is that they've got young guys coming up, and that you got to kind of bring the young guys in eventually. And it's just that this is the unfortunate situation for Kyle Busch, where the sponsor leaves, you have a guy that's ready to take the seat. And would you rather spend the big money to bring Kyle Busch back when he's had some decent but kind of up and down results over the last couple of years, or bring Ty Gibbs in now, give him this flagship car, and have veteran drivers around him to help support him in the process as well? It's a crappy situation for Kyle Busch, but the unfortunate reality for Joe Gibbs is that it probably makes the most sense to bring Ty Gibbs in now in that 18 car and have Denny Hamlin, Martin Truex Jr. there to support him in the process.
Yeah, it's just the worst timing if you're Kyle Busch, that the grandson of your team owner is ready for Cup, and it's the flagship number that you've got, and you're out of contract and you got no sponsor. If he had a sponsor for next season, this would have been done and dusted. There would be an extension.
Well, if he had a sponsor, then it would be Ty Gibbs taking over a car next, for 2024 then. But it's not the situation, and kind of context is key here. And it's kind of the crappy situation that Kyle Busch finds himself in.
Yeah. And we'll see where he goes. Probably, maybe a 50% chance if we find out next week. If not, probably the week after that. I don't think this is going to go on too much longer. I think the pen to paper will be signed here within the next 7 to 10 days, most likely, for where Kyle Busch will be signing for in 2023. But will do it for that part of the show. Let's move into Darlington. What the heck happened there? I mean, that was just insanity. Playoff drivers dropping left, right, and center. Non-playoff guys surprising the field, after the season we've had so far in the regular season. It doesn't shock me too much that there was non-playoff guys up there competing, but I don't know if we would have predicted them winning a playoff opener when there's 16 guys and the 17th seed there, technically, and Erik Jones goes up there and wins the Southern 500 for the second time in his career. What that means for him is probably, greater down the line. It's probably nothing right now, but when you look at what his future could be, if that's outside of Richard Petty GMS, racing, if it's beyond that, or if he, tries to become that team leader and build that team back up to a serious contender, we'll see in the future months and years to come, because he did sign that contract extension. So, but what a playoff opener, Kyle. What did you make of the Southern 500, specifically Erik Jones' victory? Of course, he had a little bit of luck getting there with the two guys in front of him dropping out, and he had a timely caution and everything like that to bunch the field up with 25 to go. But you have to be in the right position at the right time. And Erik Jones was pretty consistent throughout the entire night. So Erik Jones, we've talked about him on this show a lot. We're big fans of him, and he delivered once again on Sunday night.
Yeah, it was a huge win for Erik Jones. Richard Petty and GMS, technically. I don't know if we consider it GMS primarily now or Richard Petty or whatever we do. But that's a huge win for him, and kind of reaffirms what a lot of people thought, that he's still a top tier driver who can still go out and win races and challenge and be a strong driver. And he had some up and downs at Joe Gibbs Racing. We've seen this year Christopher Bell be the best that team has been in recent years. But last year, Christopher Bell was essentially the same in standings that Erik Jones was the entire time he was there. And don't forget that Erik Jones is a couple months younger than Christopher Bell as well. But for Erik Jones here, a huge win, put him back on the map for some of the bigger teams, even though his results this year have been consistently good. It usually takes that big result to get back on the radar for those bigger teams. As you mentioned, he does have that contract through at least one more year that he signed an extension for. I'm not sure if it was 1 year plus an option, 2 years, whatever it is. But when that contract is up, given his results with Petty GMS right now, he's a driver that I think should be on the radar of some of those bigger teams to try and find somebody that could potentially come on a value contract that could give you some big results. So for Erik Jones, like I said, going into this weekend, I thought that we were going to see some attrition. We were going to see some playoff drivers have issues. And if Erik Jones or a few other drivers could keep it clean throughout the race and be there at the end, they could take advantage. Granted, I didn't think it would result in a win for Jones or anything like that, but we saw playoff drivers have issues, whether it was mistakes of their own doing, mechanical issues, whatever it was. We knew that based off of what happened in the first Darlington race, there was going to be a lot of stuff happening this weekend, and it played out exactly how we thought it would in terms of a lot of crazy stuff happening, and Jones was there to clean up the scraps.
Yeah, he was impressive the entire night. And we know Darlington is a track that he's succeeded at in the past. Of course, one of his 3 wins now has come on that, worn out surface, really managing the tires. And it just seems like an Erik Jones kind of racetrack. And that's not just because he's won 2 races, but he was so consistent when he didn't win, when he was in JGR equipment. Had a couple of faults in the past couple of times he was there with Petty GMS, but overall, he's still been a really solid top 10 guy there that you can count on to get you really good points and be in contention if there are some slip ups like that. And for him to win the playoff opener, it completely changes the ball game in terms of grabbing everybody's attention, right? Like you upset the playoff guys, and that is a major statement win. And like he said in his post-race interview on the front stretch, this is a race that saved his job probably with JGR the first time in 2019. Yeah. It's now put him back on the map. And I think he's completely spot on about that. And he would know better than anybody what he went through with JGR. I think Erik Jones is a supremely talented driver. It was just unfortunate that Christopher Bell, who was winning a lot, the big 3 at the Xfinity Series at the time with Custer and Reddick and himself, it just seemed like it was all leading up to him getting a Cup Series ride, and there was only one available at the time, and that was the 20 car with Erik Jones being out of contract. And it's unfortunate that Jones got the boot, but I'm glad that he's landed on his feet somewhere where he seems like he's fitting in very, very nicely. And they're, really trying to make that team become a threat. And when you look at what Petty GMS has right now, they've got Noah Gragson coming in that 42 car for next season, and they just swept the weekend at Darlington. So better watch out for those 2 guys next season at that racetrack. But overall, I couldn't be more happy for Erik Jones. I mean, just imagine if he had won Talladega in the spring, for example. He was just the tri-oval short shoot away from winning that race. If he got the right push at the right time, we could be talking about him just winning his way into the round of 16. He was 16th in points in the regular season. Like, this was a guy that was super, super good, super consistent from a team that has been nowhere in terms of race winning capabilities. When was the last time? I mean, the last time the 43 won was a rain-shortened race with Eric Almirola in the summer in 2014. But beyond that, they have not been a legit race-winning contender for forever. I mean, it's insane to think how much this next-gen car is even the playing field for some of these midfield teams that have never had success for a long time. When you look at RCR and Petty GMS, they're getting multiple race wins now, and that is fantastic for the sport. Of course, there's safety concerns with this thing, as Kevin Harvick alluded to in his post-race, and we can all see that. I mean, there's some things that still need to be ironed out with this car for the driver's safety, but the overall racing product and how even things are has been fantastic this season. We've never seen 17 different winners at this stage of a season in NASCAR history. So this is fantastic for the overall sport. The next-gen car has been an overall success for the on-track product, and Erik Jones is just impressed once again. So could not be happier for him, and just upsetting the playoff grid like that, beating a JGR car as well on Denny Hamlin. I'm sure that was just a little bit of a sweetener to the overall victory as well. And I'm very happy for the kid. I mean, he's a great guy. Seems like he obviously lost his dad and everything like that. So he's gone through some turmoil in his life, but he's done a fantastic job with that Petty GMS equipment this season. So looking forward to seeing what he can put up for the rest of the season and moving into 2023, if he can make the playoffs, not necessarily just off of a win, but maybe off of points as well. Yep.
Should we get to the points now?
We should. And that Darlington race had a big impact on a lot of the top seeds. When you look at Chase Elliott, Ross Chastain, and Kyle Larson, they're, not by any means safer now. They were in a pretty good spot coming into the playoffs, but Chase Elliott finished last at Darlington. Kyle Larson had his issues, managed to get back on the lead lap somehow. I mean, how did he end up doing that? And then Ross Chastain had his own issues, and he ended up battling back, I believe, to just one lap down there at the end to salvage a finish that, was not indicative of what speed that car had. So Kyle Larson plus 17, Ross Chastain plus 15, Chase Elliott plus 14. So they're in a decent spot, considering their speed overall this season. They shouldn't feel too concerned, I think, going into these next 2 races. But if they have another bad result, they could be on the wrong side of that cutoff line going into Bristol. And you don't want that going in to Bristol, where you have to make up points. And then you got Alex Bowman plus 10. Kyle Busch was the highest points runner if he did not win the race, considering how well he ran in the stages. He's now plus 8 after that blown engine there in the later stages, finishing 30th. And Daniel Suarez recovered from his, initial penalty there. Of course, the competition caution really helped save his race early on there so that he could catch back up with the field. He didn't go a lap around. Yeah. But the competition caution in general, the specific reasoning there. So he's +2. Austin Cindric -2. Austin Dillon -4. Both those guys didn't really have too much speed and they weren't involved in anything on Sunday. So, a difficult playoff opener for them. Chase Briscoe, of course, had the incident with Chase Elliott there. He was an innocent bystander after the 9-car wreck. And then Kevin Harvick, the big one, -13 to the cutoff line. He's got some work to do going into Kansas and Bristol here to make up those points on his competitors. So your thoughts, Kyle, on what the points kind of mean looking forward going into Kansas? Who are you looking at to maybe jump up in that below that cutoff line? And who do you think's in jeopardy potentially even higher than Larson or around that area as well?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, a fantastic race and result for William Byron, who was somebody that came into the playoffs on quite the cold streak, got a lot of stage points, had a solid finish. And instead of being one of those guys that is trying to fight for their playoff lives the next couple of races, he's +32 and essentially has a free race if anything happens at Kansas or at Bristol. So they've got to be feeling very good, all things considered, after what they were kind of heading into the playoffs. But yeah, everybody really kind of, it's tough to say because you look at guys like Larson, Chastain, Elliott, stuff like that, and they've had so much speed over the course of the season, especially at a place like Kansas going into this weekend and Bristol after that as well, where you feel like even +15, +14, they feel good. But one more mechanical issue like that, and all of a sudden they're at the cut line or below the cut line, and it's a do or die situation going into Bristol. So as tough as it is to say, everybody that's essentially under 25 points to the cut line, all it takes is one race and you're right back in that situation. So really interested to see how things go at Kansas in particular. Kevin Harvick is going to have a really strong day to kind of climb himself at least right back to the cut line, if not getting above that, which I think they're absolutely capable of. But guys like Briscoe, Dillon, Cindric are guys that we thought would be in this situation, that had an opportunity to try and make up some points at Darlington with the issues that other people had and weren't necessarily able to. So a big couple of weeks coming up for those teams. I think we're going to see a much more quote unquote normal race at Kansas versus the attrition and issues we saw at Darlington. And we're going to have to see some big results from some of those guys in and around that cut line to either make themselves feel a lot more comfortable heading into Bristol or make themselves not in a must-win scenario going into Bristol.
I think Bristol could be like Darlington in a way with attrition because we have not done 500 miles at Bristol this season. That's going to be a test of the cars and everything like that because we did the Bristol Dirt in the spring. We have no notes on what Bristol could look like with this next gen car. So I think that reliability will play a little bit of a factor in that race for sure. Different to Darlington, of course, because it is a short track and you're relying more on the brakes and your mechanical stuff slightly more, I would say, than Darlington, but you still need everything to work properly in order to make up that ground. And I think when you look at Kansas for the 1.5 miles, I think the guys that are going to be fast are going to get a lot of points, and the guys that aren't going to are kind of like in that middle range, back half of the top 10, mid range of the teens. They're just going to have to try and scratch and claw their way for every single stage point that they can get when they can get it. If that presents an opportunity for a strategy call late, if they need to get some stage points, and then you got to sacrifice track position for the beginning of the next stage, you might have to go ahead and do that and see what you can salvage if there's some chaos in whatever the next stage may be. So Kansas, I mean, don't underestimate this track, man. I mean, I think that this track, it could surprise some people. It's not necessarily what it was when it was first repaved, a decade ago, but it still can present some challenges. And we've seen that in the past at this track with some playoff guys having some real problems, whether that's a blown engine, caught tire, a spin on a restart off of turn 2. I mean, there's been a lot of different incidents over the years that have taken out some guys from contention. So don't sleep on this 1.5 mile track package when it comes to the playoffs. We have not had a 1.5 mile race in quite some time this season. So it's going to be very interesting to see who's learned from when we had them earlier on in the season, who's improved, who's fallen back. Have the Toyotas still have that advantage from the last time we were here because they were super dominant in the spring? Is that going to continue, or has the rest of the field kind of caught up with them on their 1.5 mile package? We'll see on Sunday. So points are going to be very interesting if some of the favorites are going to be in contention here. for a cutoff line kind of fringe area going into Bristol. I would hate to be anybody that's around 20 plus points right now if you have a bad day at Kansas. So we'll see what happens. And what are you looking forward to most at Kansas before we get into the fantasy stuff?
Yeah, just that it's been a long time since we went to a mile and a half. So it's going to be interesting to see if, like you mentioned, that Toyota dominance continues. And if it does, who kind of rises to the top. Of course, Kurt Busch, who was the winner last time we were at Kansas, isn't in the field. So what does that mean for Ty Gibbs? Does he have a really strong day? What does it mean for the rest of the Toyotas that are in the playoffs? And what does it mean for some of the guys that were in the mix last time at Kansas? Can they find that extra ground and be up there with the Toyotas? So a lot of really interesting things heading into this race.
Definitely. And Kyle, you want to go over what happened last week with Darlington with our picks before we get into this week's picks?
Chaos is the word that I would use. It looked like our debut segment or restarted segment, whatever you want to say, was a bit of a curse at one point, just given the issues that we saw.
At one point, the whole race, it felt like it was.
Man, it was crazy. But at the end of the day, we had decent days, everything considered, given that we have 5 drivers to pick from. And if they have issues, it's not like the NASCAR Fantasy app and stuff like that, where we can slide somebody in and stuff like that. We have our 5 guys, and if those 5 guys do good, then great. And if they have issues, then we're screwed. But I barely edged you out over the 5 drivers, 135 points to 130 points. It really looked scary for me there when Harvick had his issues with him just picking up the 4 points, because Truex then dropped out with just 21 points. Larson recovered to have 25 points. But the big swing was me having Erik Jones there and getting the win and having 45 points out of my final pick. Whereas you had a solid lineup throughout with Hamlin there and Reddick and stuff like that. But then, of all people, Chase Elliott, your final pick, just tossing it out there because it's Chase Elliott, for crying out loud, just the 1 point. And that ended up being the big swing, the final round there. So,
well, I don't know. The race leader blowing his motor with 24 to go was probably a bit of a swing too.
Well, no, the swing ended up being the final round, me getting 45 points versus your 1. So
okay, all right,
that is
but
swing.
Yeah, we lost some points in that ladder, both of us. I mean, throughout the last 100 laps. I mean, it was survival mode. But let's look ahead to Kansas.
I'm not
here,
done
Kyle.
yet, sir.
Oh, I'm
sorry.
Let
me finish my damn segment. Thank you very much.
Okay.
In terms of guys that we missed on in our 10 picks, William Byron was the biggest point scorer with 45 points. We were a little scared of their dip in form over the summer, but they showed that their near race winning speed at Darlington was still there this weekend. So that was the big miss. And then the other big miss was Christopher Bell as well, picking up 44 points, who had a pretty solid day, all things considered. So overall, a pretty solid debut for us. I do pick up the win in the show segment, but for a personal fantasy, you still pick up the win once again. So I got a lot of work to do in that regard. But let's get into Kansas, shall we?
We shall indeed. How do you want to do this here, Kyle? Who wants to go first? Are we going loser goes first, or do you want to defer?
It'll be the same. It'll be the same every week, where the winner gets to pick whether they get the first pick or the wraparound.
All right. Well, funny enough, I got to throw it back to you here.
Yeah,
what do you want to do?
I think last time you took the wraparound.
Yes.
And I liked how that worked for you. But there's so many different intriguing options this week that I think I'm going to take the first pick and see what you do on the 2-3. So I will take the first overall pick here.
Okay. I have a guy lined up. We'll see if you take him, but go ahead with your first overall selection for Kansas.
Well, with my first overall pick, it's going to be the same first overall pick that I took last time. Kyle Larson is my first overall pick for the fantasy draft. Won the playoff race at Kansas last year, finished second earlier this year. Toyotas were dominant, but the only guy that was up there contending with them was Kyle Larson. If Hendrick finds more speed, he's going to be right there for the win. If they stay status quo at Kansas and Toyota's still there, well, then Larson's still going to be in the mix. The couple of mechanical issues back-to-back does scare me a little bit, but all things considered, I think Larson is the safe bet as the first overall pick.
That was crazy that he had another kind of engine hiccup there, and then it just proved to be nothing. I don't quite understand what the heck was going on with the Hendrick engines, but You took the guy I wanted. Let's just get that out of the way.
I didn't know who. I thought you might lean a Toyota guy, so that's interesting.
No, I wanted the guy that just, no matter what it seems like, he's like in the top three there, like running the wall and just ripping it. If he had track position there, anybody in that top three, I think they probably would have won in the spring. But all right, you've taken Mr. Larson.
2-3. Here we go.
For myself, I'm going to take. I'm going to go with a bit of a redemption. I'm going to go with Kyle Busch this week at Kansas, and I'm going to take Ross Chastain as well. I think both of those guys. I'm taking two guys I took last week, but their mile and a half results have spoken for themselves this season. I think they've been so good contenders each and every week. Chastain was up there in the mix, finished 7th in the spring. Kyle Busch finished 3rd. They both led laps. So I feel like I can't go wrong with them. There's a lot of different guys I feel like in that top mix that you could pick, but I do want a bit of variety just in case Toyota isn't as strong. I think Kyle Busch will be the strongest or top 2 Toyota this weekend. And then I think Ross Chastain will be maybe second behind Kyle Larson for the Chevrolet camp at Kansas. So I will take those as my second and third picks.
Yeah, Kyle Busch is a really strong pick this weekend. I of course, Kurt got all the attention and stuff. Larson was right there with them, but easy to forget that Kyle was right there for a lot of that race. Alrighty. I don't forget. Yeah, no kidding. So far, all of our picks are on the same team as last time. He's going to switch it up. Let's buck that trend, shall we? 4th overall, I'll be taking Denny Hamlin. Yeah. The Toyota Speed is the Toyota Speed, and it's a track that Hamlin had some good results at, whether it's been getting at stage points, getting good finish, stuff like that. So I'll take Hamlin there in the 4th spot. And number 5, I will go back to the Hendrick camp, and I will take Chase Elliott here. Just good speed overall all season long. They have still a bit of a buffer to the cutoff line here in the round of 16, but it's a lot tighter than I'm sure they would like it to be. Chase Elliott bouncing back after a driver mistake at Darlington early in the race. Kansas has been a track where he's had some really strong results, not quite as much the first race this season, but just too much to pass up on there in the 5 slot. So I'll take Hamlin and Elliott for my 4-5.
Those are great picks. I mean, those could easily have been my 2 and 3. There's, I think, probably your top 5 guys. I don't know who you would have taken if I let those 2 slide.
I might have slid somebody else in for Ross Chastain, but I think after this is where it really gets interesting. I think Chastain is absolutely in that mix, though, for sure. Like, you could absolutely make a case for Chastain being in there.
All right. My next guy is 100% going back to JGR. Christopher Bell. I'm taking that 20 car. Love him at this track. I think he could be a race winner candidate for this weekend. Yep. I really do. It would be kind of funny if Erik Jones and Christopher Bell open the playoffs with victories this season. Not gonna lie.
Yeah, it would.
But he led laps in the spring as well, finished 5th, and the numbers are trending upwards with Christopher Bell. Had a great start to his playoffs. I don't see that this first round just lines up really well for him. So I think the 20 car is absolutely going to be in contention for the race win this weekend. So I'll take the 20 car. And then for my next selection, this is where it gets a bit tricky here. I think now you're getting into who the fringe guys.
Some swings, yeah.
Yeah. But I will take a guy that's going to be desperate for some points, Kevin Harvick. Okay. Been too good here historically. Didn't have the greatest spring race, finishing 15th, but over the past 7 races here, I'm pulling it out again. His average finish is 6.9 here, 4 top 5s, 5 top 10s, 198 laps led. This is a guy that does really well at Kansas. I think he needs some points. Could go for some stage points and tries to salvage a finish if cautions play right. But I do think the Fords will bring a little bit more speed than they showed in the spring. Kevin Harvick is my 4th selection in the draft.
I like that back-to-back. That's a really strong duo there. Thanks. You know what? It worked for me last time. We're going back to the non-playoffs.
Oh, no. I thought you were thinking Erik Jones. Oh, okay.
Martin Truex Jr. is my 8th overall pick.
Great pick.
Kind of surprised me to see that he has six consecutive top 10s at Kansas. only one of those inside the top 5, but has led a handful of laps back in 2019, early 2020. But since then has just kind of quietly had some really solid results at Kansas. Of course, the Toyota speed earlier this year was really impressive. Of course, that team is still looking to win races, even though they're not in the playoffs. So I'll take Truex as my number 8 there. And I like the Toyotas this weekend. I'm taking Bubba Wallace as my 9th overall pick. Hey, look, the 9th overall swing worked for me last time. This is technically a playoff driver, just not for the Drivers' Championship, for the Owners' Championship.
Yeah.
Had a solid points day, all things considered, for the opening round of the weekend. 23-11 literally won this race earlier this year. And if not for pit road troubles and pit stop troubles, Bubba Wallace probably would have been up there in that top 5 conversation as well. So I'll take the swing on 23-11, and Bubba Wallace is my final pick of this draft.
I'm really liking your lineup. I'm not going to lie.
Thank you.
I think it's pretty sporty.
But I think you could definitely surprise here. You've got a lot of really good swings.
This is my problem, though. This is my dilemma. We know how I get when I get frazzled at the end here when you take some guys overall that I want. 10th overall pick.
Where are we going here?
I need the NBA draft music.
Yeah, I know. No kidding. I should put that in the post.
Yeah. I'm going to go with a guy that kind of shocked with some speed here to open the playoffs. Willie B. William Byron will round out my lineup. It's between him and Ryan Blaney. I think Blaney is better at this track than results have showed, but he just can never finish the race. And I feel like he just hasn't had that race winning speed, obviously, all season. He's been pretty consistent, but I think William Byron, from what he said post-race, they've gone back to the basics. And I think that's what we really saw in that summer months. They were experimenting. They tried some new things. They went down the wrong road, and they opened the playoffs back with their bread and butter. And they had some pretty good speed, top 5, top 7 speed. And that's what I'm going to hope for again at Kansas. They led laps in the spring as well. Finished 16th, so not the greatest end result for them, but I'm hoping that they can really round it out here and get back into that early season form where we thought they were a championship contender in that Hendrick bunch, right there with Chase Elliott and right there with Kyle Larson. So William Byron rounds up my lineup with a 10th overall selection.
I like that. So that means the championship leader right now, Joey Logano, not in either of our lineups.
Yeah.
Top 5 currently, Tyler Reddick in the standings, not in our lineups, and Ryan Blaney there as well, not in our lineups. So some big hitters not in our lineups this weekend, but I think that kind of lends to what we saw earlier this season in the race and kind of who had the dominant cars and stuff like that, where we really do expect this to be a Toyota track this weekend.
Yeah, and Logano's just not quite had the track record here to show me that I can put him in my lineup.
I agree.
And the Penske cars haven't been fantastic on 1.5 miles this season. When you look at, I would expect Hendrick to bring a better package this time around, and JGR has just been fantastic this season on them. So
Trackhouse low key really strong there as well.
Yeah, Daniel Suarez was an outside shot. Outside shot, because we talked about this in our playoff predictions last week. Suarez was running 4th or 5th at the time that he wrecked in the spring. So they have the speed. It's just whether or not they can finish the results. I'm going to go with more pedigree in playoff performers than a guy that's in there trying to spice up the party. So fascinating stuff as always, Kyle. That'll do it for the fantasy part, the draft, where we got 5 different guys.
Let's go over our
I do think
teams
it's
before
good.
we get to the final picks and stuff like that. So I led things off first overall with Kyle Larson, and then rounded out my team with Denny Hamlin, Chase Elliott, Martin Truex Jr., and taking the swing on Bubba Wallace.
For myself, I'm going with Kyle Busch. Rowdy's going to be in contention for the win this weekend. Chastain, the Melon Man, he's going to be up there in contention this weekend. Christopher Bell, he's going to be up there in contention this weekend. I'm basically hoping my top 5 is the only top 5 that happens this weekend.
I really hope that happens at some point. That would be very impressive.
Yeah, and then they all wreck. And then Kevin Harvick was my 4th selection, and then ran it all off. Willie B, William Byron. So
good stuff.
I like your lineup probably a little bit more. But if I lit off with Kyle Larson, I feel like I would feel a little bit more confident. But this is always what happened last year. I'd always feel like, man, you got the better lineup. So it's bringing me deja vu.
I mean,
again.
To be fair, last year, the stats kind of proved that I did usually have a better lineup.
Yeah, that's why. As soon as the show starts up again, I get all frazzled and I'm all over the place. And but let's hope that's not the
warfare.
Case. Oh, I'm terrible at it. It's my weak link. So
alrighty. Well, speaking of weak link, let's see if you can get some back with the winner pick here. With all your guys being in Yeah, I'll let you pick. Do you want to go first or second?
I'll go second. I'll go
Okay.
second. Yeah.
He's deferring. Okay.
I'm deferring.
Yeah. Football's back tonight. Pretty pumped about that.
True.
Where do I want to go for the winner pick? Man, I think that this is going to be a low-key really fun race this weekend. I think there's going to be a lot of people in contention. Hell, we saw Kansas earlier this year was a really fun finish and everything like that. Toyota came out on top earlier this year. I will say that Toyota comes out on top again. I'll say Denny Hamlin goes out and gets the victory this weekend.
Okay. For myself,
pick one of my drivers.
No. I can't pick Larson. I feel like that's too much of a cheap move. It's a cheap move. I'm going to go with one of my guys.
That's probably good.
Christopher Bell is going to win this weekend.
Big swing.
I really like the 20 car. Love Adam Stevens overall setup wise at this track.
You could have just left it at I love Adam Stevens, but
I love Adam Stevens. You can edit that in. No. Yeah, I think the 20 car is going to be someone to be reckoned with this weekend. And I'm really happy he's in my lineup. So we'll see if JGR can continue their dominance really on the mile and a half this season in terms of overall speed. The results necessarily haven't had that showing because they've been some late race cautions or somebody gets track position at the right time. It is a little bit difficult to pass for the lead. So, you can make your way through traffic. So we'll see what happens. Who can get the most stage points? Who's going to really maximize a mile and a half here this weekend where it's a bit more predictable than going into Bristol. You cannot rely on Bristol. We've said that a couple of times throughout this episode, but I'm sure all the drivers know it. I'm sure all the teams know it. It's a big unknown going into Bristol when you're only going to have about 20 minutes of practice and qualifying too. So it's not going to be easy. And I'm going to have a nervous wreck, of course, as per usual when these 10 weeks come around. But I'm looking forward to it. Any final thoughts, Kyle, before we wrap up today's episode?
Yeah, just feeling good going into this weekend. Hope we get some good racing.
Same here. We'll be back next week. F1, of course, in action for the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. And then IndyCar as well, deciding a championship here. So going to be very, very interesting. We'll have episodes for you next week for NASCAR looking ahead to Bristol. And we'll see if any F1 news, specifically around maybe Colton Herta, AlphaTauri, whatever happens with that. Maybe some news breaks after that. We'll talk about the IndyCar season as a whole in general, probably as well. But for this episode, I've been Lukas Wacker. He's been Kyle Cushman, signing off for now. Make sure to follow us on all the links of our social channels in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll talk to you next week, teeing up Bristol. Enjoy the races, everybody.